This message comes to you from King's Church Wirral, UK. We hope that as you listen, you will be encouraged, blessed and inspired.
Hello and welcome to this teaching from King's Church Wirral. My name's Ben and we're beginning a new series today looking specifically at what Jesus taught about certain issues. Before we begin looking at detail at today's topic, I just want to take some time to explain why we feel that this is such an important series. Why are we going to take a number of weeks to teach on it? If I were to say that I was a vegetarian and yet I ate meat, it would not be unfair to say that I'm not a vegetarian. Similarly, if I were to say that I was a Marxist and yet I believed in a free trade capitalist economy, it wouldn't be unfair to say that I'm not a Marxist. If I were to say that I was a friend of the earth and yet I drove a 3-litre sports car and exclusively used single-use disposable plastic cups, it wouldn't be unfair to say that I'm not a friend of the earth. And yet the same is increasingly not true of the term Christian. In the world we currently live in, there seems to be a huge variance in what that term means. And it's worth asking ourselves, what do we think that term means? For instance, if I attend church every week, does that make me a Christian? Well, if I pray and read the Bible regularly, do these things make me a Christian? What if I do those things, but I don't seem to make my decisions and lifestyle based on what I'm reading? Or what if I'm selective over which bit I put into practice? What if I correctly hate the things that I think the Bible teaches me to hate, but I don't love the things that God loves with the same passion? What if I take the right stand against evil, but I don't actually do any standing up for good? Am I a Christian if I stand on the steps of a church holding a Bible while ignoring the injustices in the world that I find on my way to that church? Is that enough to be called a Christian? Similarly, the other end, I guess, do I have to get everything right all the time to be a Christian? The New Testament's got a lot to say on embracing limitations and weaknesses. So perfection, that clearly can't be a prerequisite of being a Christian. Some might even say that decisions made for us can make us a Christian. Things like infant baptism or being taken to Sunday school every week, other such activities, things that we actually have very little say in. You see, the word Christian, to a large extent, has lost any real clear definition in the Western world. Certainly in practice. So I would like to propose one for the sake of this teaching series, that a Christian is someone who makes it their life's goal to live in accordance with the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, to put those teachings into practice, and to model their life after his life. This has been put really well, far better, with the expression, it is somebody who aims to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. Now, in order to do that, it's quite a short logical leap to say that the knowledge of what Jesus taught on a range of subjects must be something that we give our attention to. Jesus was an offence to people when he was on earth because he said and taught things that flew in the face of the accepted views of the day. This is still true. The teachings of Jesus in some areas are an offence to the political left. And in others, they are an offence to the political right. And anyone who wishes to follow Jesus will at some point in their growth into that pursuit find that some of the teachings of Jesus are an offence to them. Now, if you find something that Jesus teaches and you disagree with it, That's fine. But it does raise that first question of what does it mean to be a Christian? Can you claim to be a Christian whilst at the same time saying Christ got it wrong? With this in mind, therefore, we embark on our new series looking at the teachings of Jesus. And we hope as a leadership that you will be encouraged, that you will be inspired, that you'll be challenged, and maybe even that you'll be offended. Because if you are, you will find yourself having a lot in common with the people that Jesus spent most of his earthly time with. So, with all that said, this week's teaching is looking at what Jesus said about being his follower. Now, in order to look at this clearly, it makes sense to look at what the word that the Bible uses to describe a follower of Jesus. The word that is used is generally translated in the New Testament as disciple. Sometimes in some translations it is translated as follower. It is the Greek word matheteis. Now, if you've been around church culture for a length of time, you will probably have heard the word disciple, because we talk about disciple all the time. But if you listen closely to how people use that word, it's generally and pretty much exclusively used as a verb. You'll hear people say things like, I disciple someone, or I'm being discipled by, or they might say, who are you discipling? Or, the whole leadership conference is looking at discipleship programs and how you do disciple. Now, I know what people mean by that, and what they are pursuing or what they are building is not wrong, but it's not the correct word to use, disciple. Because the word matheteis, which is translated in English translations as disciple, is used 268 times in the New Testament, and every single time it is a noun, not a verb. It is not something that you do or is done to you. It is something that you are or are not. You are a matheteis, or you are not a matheteis. It's defined in Greek dictionaries as one who engages in learning through instruction from another, a pupil or an apprentice. It is the person who engages in the learning. So the writers of the New Testament chose a word that means to live under the instruction of another in the way an apprentice would. That is, recognizing a superiority of understanding and altering your ways to become like their way. If I was discipling, or if I was a disciple or an apprentice of a plumber, I would be recognizing that the person who has done it longer knows it better than me, is better at the job. I would recognize my own weaknesses and limitations, the things I can't do, and I would probably go with that plumber to work, watch how they do it, learn how to do it, pick up tips from the trade, and eventually be able to do it myself in the way that they do it. Sometimes when we've had work done on the house and plasterers come in, they will often have an apprentice, and the apprentice often doesn't look like they're doing much. What they're doing is they are spending time with the master craftsman, and they are learning how to do it, and they are watching and they are recognizing this person is better at it than I am, and I'm going to learn how to do it from them. But they are the apprentice. If we apply this to the word Christian or to disciple, if we apply this to the idea of being an apprentice of Jesus, we arrive at the conclusion that the language that is used of a person is one who is engaged in an active, ongoing change to become like Jesus. That's the language that the writers of the New Testament used. And Jesus actually says this. He makes it clear to people, but it is slightly lost in translation and the language barriers that are found from the New Testament. So if you take this example, in Matthew 4, verses 18 to 22, it charts a short story about two sets of brothers, Simon and Andrew, and James and John. This is what it says. While they were walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, that's Jesus. He saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. He said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in a boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Now we can see the pun that Jesus is making here. That's not lost in the translation. Fishers of men, and they were fishermen. But what we can lose is that the first century, they had idioms and figures of speech and word pictures just like we have today. And the phrase fishers of men was a term that was used for a great rabbi who was able to draw people under his instruction. So Jesus is a great rabbi. And in this call, he is drawing people under his instruction. And he says to these people, if you follow me, if you come under my instruction, you can be like me. I can make you a fisher of men. Just like you would say, I am a fisher of men. And their response to this call was spot on. They dropped their nets. They walked away from their current way of being and embraced the call to become like Jesus, as apprentices do. They say, you get it better than I get it. I'm coming to learn from you. I'm coming to follow you. These two brothers walked with Jesus everywhere for 3 years. They saw the miracles. They saw his compassion on the poor and the needy. They learned how to pray by watching Jesus do it. They drove out demons. They walked on water. They saw him crucified, raised from the dead. They walked 40 days after that. They were with him. They became like him, and they did what he did. They were mathetes. They were apprentices of Jesus. To be clear, it was not their decision to come to him in some time of crisis, nor was it their recognition of him that made them mathetes, that made them what the New Testament calls a disciple. It was the ongoing life that caused them to change to become like him that made them apprentices, made them what the New Testament calls disciple and what we would often call a Christian. But Jesus had a lot more to say about being his follower. In Matthew 16, there's another encounter with Peter that really comes to the crux of what it is to be a follower of Jesus. Certainly adds more to our understanding. It says this, starting in verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples, explain to his mathetes, so he's teaching them, that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter looked at him and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. I shall never let that happen to you. Or this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to be my mathetes, must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Now, at first glance, this seems like Peter trying to protect his master from death. And it feels like a pretty strong rebuke that comes back from Jesus. He says, I don't want you to die. And Jesus is like, that is not the right way of thinking. That seems very strong. But there is more to it than this. You see, in the time of Jesus, Israel, where they were, was under Roman rule. And the people were waiting for a Messiah that was going to free them from that rule and restore the land to the people. And the only way this could have happened is if Rome stopped having occupancy of Jerusalem. So what people were expecting and looking for was a Messiah that would gather some sort of army or some sort of following around him and march on Jerusalem and kick out or defeat the Roman garrison that was stationed in Herod's palace next to the temple. And once they had done that and they defeated the Romans in the city and retaken the city, they would then establish themselves in the temple and they would wait for the Roman army. and then God would deliver them and they would get the city back and they would no longer be under Roman occupation. But what had happened when people had tried to do this was either they hadn't been very good at defeating the garrison, or if they had eventually ended up being defeated by Rome, and the leader of that movement and the chief leaders with him were all crucified. So when Peter hears that Jesus is saying, I am going to go to Jerusalem, but I am going to die, there is also a sense for Peter of, but if you're going to die, then I'm going to die too, because everybody knows I'm your right-hand guy. I'm the guy who's with you. Suddenly, Jesus' words come through so much more literally when he says, if anyone is to be my disciple, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. This was literal for Peter. Will you walk with me to Jerusalem, knowing that if I die, you die? It's all or nothing with me. No half measures in this pursuit. Be with me, become like me, and be prepared to do what I do. That line that Jesus used there, whoever wants to be my matheteus must deny themselves, is one of the greatest, most offensive lines to our culture today. We are told, embrace yourself, be true to yourself. Never let anyone tell you that you're wrong or that something about you needs changing. Don't know yourself and love yourself with everything in you. And Jesus says, yeah, it's great, that's what everybody's saying. But if you're going to follow me, you must deny yourself and become like me. Take up your cross and follow me. During his time on earth, Jesus spent a lot of his time teaching his matheteus, teaching his disciples what he thought about things, getting their thinking in line with his thinking. The Sermon on the Mount is a really good and rich example of this. Throughout the teaching from Jesus, he uses this expression. He says, you have heard it said, but I say. You see, he's trying to change their thinking. He's trying to say, this is the way you currently view the world, but I am going to say there is a better way, there is another way, there is a different way. And you might not like it, but it is my way. He said, for instance, you have heard it said, do not murder. And everyone's like, yes, that's good. We agree, do not murder. But I say, don't even be angry. Whoa, hang on, I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be angry. I get angry sometimes. Of course I'm allowed to be angry. Jesus says, deny yourself and follow me. I say, don't get angry. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. I say, don't even lust in your mind. People are like, yeah, don't commit adultery. I don't even lust. That's not possible. You've heard it said, don't break an oath. But I say, be so honest that you don't even have to make an oath. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. You've heard it said that you can take reasonable retribution. That if someone takes your eye, you can take their eye. If someone takes their tooth, you can take their. If someone takes your tooth, you can take their tooth. You can take reasonable retribution for the wrongs done to you. I say, forgive every offence. Now, we find that very hard. That is a hard teaching of Jesus, even for people who have followed him for years. That you feel like such an injustice in that. But Jesus is saying this is a better way. Are you going to think the way you think? Are you going to try and think the way I think? Jesus said, you have heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. That seems fair. But I say, love your enemy. These are Jesus' teachings on these things. If we are his followers, do we rejoice when we see those that silence or hate us destroyed? You see, that sounds like hating my enemies. When I rejoice in the destruction, that sounds like hating my enemies. Jesus said to love my enemy. I've heard Christians talk about defending our rights, not letting our enemies get their way, and we have to fight for what we have and defeat them and beat them. But in the life of Jesus, I see something very different. I see a man who, as he was being crucified, as his rights were being stripped from him, as he was being humiliated and nailed to a cross, His response was, "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do." His first disciples, they echoed this prayer. Stephen, as he was martyred, as he was stoned to death, his prayer was not, "Smite them, Lord, in your anguish." It was, "Forgive them." See, Stephen thought like Jesus, became like Jesus, and did what Jesus did, forgave those that were killing him. On another occasion, some people came to him, and these people wanted to follow him. They wanted to become disciples. They wanted to become Mathenaeus. This happens in Matthew 8, verses 18 to 22. It says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. It says, then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, birds have nests. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple came to him and said, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus said, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." So this man comes to him and says, "I'm going to follow you wherever you go." Jesus' reply is, "Are you prepared to be very uncomfortable?" You see, foxes can be comfortable. They've got dens to sleep in. They've got holes to sleep in. Birds of the air, they can be comfortable. They've got nests to settle in. Jesus said, "I don't have that. Are you prepared to not have that? Are you prepared to be with me, become like me, do what I do?" Another says, "Okay, let me bury my father." Now, this is steeped in cultural significance. The cultural requirement was to honour your father by living under his rule until he died. And then you'd be free to pursue your own way. And he's saying, "Let me bury my father, and then I will follow you." Jesus replies to the effect of, "Following me means following me. If there's somebody who is not following me, don't follow them." It's another turn of phrase, "Let the dead bury their own dead." They're not following me. You need to not follow them. You need to make a decision to follow me. That's what Jesus is saying. See, Jesus was not always nice about being his follower. He doesn't always seem to be that positive about being his follower. He seems to make it hard for people. But that's because I believe he knew that following him was a hard thing to do. And having an awareness from the start going into following him was an important thing that people had to know. He made it clear to people that to be with him, to become like him, to do what he did, that takes sacrifice and total commitment. It's not a label you can just take. Neither is defined by the way you come into it. His teachings on this are pretty hard to swallow sometimes, and they are a deep challenge to anyone who says they are a follower of Jesus. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at many things that Jesus taught his followers about how to live like he did. Being a follower means committing to developing a close and personal relationship with Jesus, to think his thoughts, to believe his beliefs, to look to practice his life, to be with him, to become like him, to do what he did. And Jesus clearly expects his followers to be with him and to spend time with him. The disciplines of prayer, meditation, silence, worship, these are practices that can cause us as his followers to be with him. And it's crucial to the life of a Mathenaeus to be with him. The first disciples, they were with him. They spent every day with him for years. Being with him was crucial to what it was to be a follower. That is modelled in the way he treated them. Being a follower was not something that they clocked onto at 9 in the morning and clocked off at 5. It wasn't a job. It was an entire way of being with him. Jesus clearly expects his followers to become like him. It's found in the first call, "I'll make you fishers of men." But when people come to him throughout his time on earth, he often greets them with words to the effect of, "Look, this is the way I do it. Will you do it that way too?" There's another example of this in the rich young ruler that's found in all 3 of the Gospels. But just reading from Mark 10, starting at verse 17, it says, "As he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked him, 'Good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?'" Jesus said, why do you call me good? No one's good except God alone. Look, you know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honour your father and mother. And he said to him, Teacher, I have kept these things from my youth up. Looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, one thing you lack. Go and sell all you possess, give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. But at these words, he was saddened, and he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. Look at the motivation of the man and the response of Jesus. This man was saying, what must I do to get eternal life? And Jesus' response was, follow the commandments. And the man says he's done it. And then he highlights in the man an area of his life that is not like the way Jesus does it. He says, this is what you lack. This is what you are not doing. This is how you are not at that point. Get rid of the possessions, give them to the poor, and follow me. Learn from me. Do it the way I do it. That's how you get eternal life. That's how Jesus answers that question. What must I do to get eternal life? Follow me. Come and follow me. And he also wants his followers to do what he did. He wants them to be with him. He wants them to become like him. He wants them to do what he did. You know, when Peter walks on water, he is doing what Jesus is doing. This is more than just Peter's faith as a miracle. This is Peter's faith in himself as a disciple. You said I could be like you. You're walking on water. You shout to me and I can walk on water. Peter knows it's possible because Jesus has said, you will be able to do what I do. Jesus says in John 14 verse 12 that whoever believes in him will do the works I have been doing and greater. Do the works I have been doing and greater. But this last statement, this do what he does statement, don't read this as a sort of reward for achieving the first two. It's not like, if you're with me and you become like me, I'm going to reward you by allowing you to do miracles. That's a misreading of this. Jesus gave to the poor. And Jesus was generous with money. His disciples can do what he did. They can also not carry with them the sort of burden of accumulation of wealth and accumulation of possession. Jesus' disciples do what he did. Jesus looked after the widow and the orphan and the foreigner. His disciples can do what he did. Jesus had time of silence in prayer. He fasted. He took Sabbath. He taught the scriptures and he understood the scriptures. Jesus partied and celebrated, but also mourned and grieved. Jesus stood up for injustice and laid down his life for his enemies. Jesus sets to his followers an example of how to be like him in all situations. That is the call to do what he did. It's not just the miraculous. It is the lifestyle of Jesus that is a standard of the Matheteus. If you see Jesus doing it, his desire is that you do it. So as we go through this series, there may be weeks that deeply challenge you and make you really rethink what you hold to. But the response of this week is to settle in your heart the desire to pursue. To be with him, to become like him, and to be prepared to do what he did. That's what Jesus taught about being his follower. Thanks for listening.
We hope that you've been blessed by this message. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at www.kingschurchwirral.co.uk.